Back in 2015, a friend I knew from my college days hit the jackpot and scored a visa lottery that allowed him to move to the United States. That lit a fire under me to start trying for a lottery visa so my wife and I could make the move too. We were both in our mid-20s and we'd always fantasized about finding better opportunities in the US. While I held on to hope that luck might be on my side, my wife was pretty skeptical. She kept telling me I was wasting my time, pointing out how slim the chances were to actually get into the program. She wasn't wrong, but I didn't give up. I kept at it because I couldn't see a future for us in our own country. Even though we both had college degrees, we couldn't land decent jobs. So I scraped together some money and launched a small shop. My wife and I became shop owners, scraping by just enough to cover the shop's rent. Then, out of the blue, a letter arrived in the mail that was about to flip our lives upside down: the lottery visa. When that letter showed up, announcing that we were among the lucky winners, our hearts filled with excitement and hope. I'll confess, I had this rosy image of the United States in my head. I thought all our struggles were finally over, and my wife and I were ready to ride off into the sunset and live the classic American dream. Our only hitch was needing a sponsor in the US, someone we knew. Our choices came down to my old classmate now living in Georgia, and a childhood neighbor from way back, though we weren't close. My classmate didn't fit the bill due to his recent move, so the neighbor stepped in. He was generous enough to let us share his 2-bedroom apartment in New York, where he lived with his family. Once we got to the United States, reality hit like a storm. The dream we'd painted of America felt distant and blurry. The neighbor who was supposed to help us threw us out after just 2 months, not much time to get our act together. My wife and I had to hustle to find jobs and a place to stay. I got it, though. The neighbor's place wasn't even enough for his own family, let alone us. Despite how we left his place, I had nothing but gratitude. I had a soft spot for the US since there were so many work options, even though the pay wasn't great for our lifestyle. So we ended up stuck in the rat race. We could only make progress if we put in extra hours, so we ended up working all the time. To make things tougher, my wife got pregnant around then, so she switched to part-time work while I held down 2 jobs. At that point, I was putting in a grueling 20 hours a day. At some point, I got a motorcycle so we didn't have to rely on the bus and could get around quicker. Then she had the baby and became a stay-at-home mom. I was used to the long hours by now. My wife handled taking care of our daughter, managing house chores and cooking, while I brought in the income. Despite the rocky start, we found our footing within 13 months. We got our own apartment and I had a motorcycle while my wife had a car. I was working as a machine operator at a local mill shop. Life was decent, but I had a feeling it could be even better. I knew I was heading for burnout eventually, and in order to climb the ladder and improve our social standing, we needed higher education. My wife and I already had bachelor's degrees from our home country, but they were worthless here unless we got an MBA, which is a 2-year degree. My wife and I had a discussion and came up with a plan. She'd go to school while I worked. Once she finished and landed a job, we'd switch roles and I'd pursue my degree. Sounds like a solid plan, right? Well, not quite. When my wife started her MBA program, I kept in touch with a college buddy in Georgia. He had become a successful real estate agent, flipping houses and doing really well. He kept urging me to move down there, citing the reasonable cost of living and more opportunities. But I kept putting it off, got too comfy, and that was one of our biggest blunders in sticking around New York. I was raking in more money than ever before, and I even had enough to support our families back home. My wife is driven and smart. She knew that an MBA would open doors for a better future, so I figured we were on the same page. She attended classes in the evenings while I took over baby duty at home. We had a neighbor with young kids and we exchanged babysitting favors with them. I clocked in long hours to provide for my family. Our journey was full of challenges, yet our shared love and nurtured dreams kept us moving forward. After 3 years, my wife put in the effort and earned her MBA. Soon enough, she landed a well-paying job at a logistics company. The future looked promising and everything was falling into place just as we had hoped. Hope filled us as we envisioned our daughter growing up in a world where aspirations could become reality, where hard work reaps rewards. What could possibly go wrong? Well, my wife had different plans. The initial 4 months of her new job marked some of the happiest times for us. I left my job to be a stay-at-home dad and quickly complete my MBA program. It seemed like everything was unfolding according to plan. Her work hours were only 9 a day, and the rest of the time was family time. Then she brought up the idea of having another baby. I wanted to wait until I finished school, but she insisted because she felt time ticking away. Reluctantly, I agreed and we started trying. But just 2 months later, it's like something changed in her. She began working longer hours, hanging out with colleagues and new friends. She got caught up in the American lifestyle, carried away by her high-flying career, and lost sight of our roots. She'd stroll in at 8 p.m., acting like she forgot we had a family waiting at home, and when I'd ask her about it, she'd get all defensive, as if she forgot who got us into this whole situation. Instead of appreciating the moves I'd made, she turned into a selfish, shallow person. I've been putting this family first, from our home country to now. But it seemed like every little opportunity she got, she couldn't hold back. She got consumed by the American way of life, started arguing and showing me disrespect, just like those American women you see on TV. Now that my wife was making more money than me, she'd stay at work late, often hanging out with friends and co-workers. I was either hitting the books while taking care of the baby or heading to school while someone else watched over our little one, probably our neighbor. On top of that, I was on the hunt for a side gig to have some extra cash, so I wouldn't have to ask my wife for money. I was handling household chores, cooking, and taking care of the baby. Meanwhile, all she had to do was work, and whenever she came home late, she'd be in a sour mood. I did my best to keep her happy, even suggesting a massage now and then, but she'd always find fault in everything I did. It seemed like my efforts weren't good enough, and I was constantly tiptoeing around her. The more successful she got, the worse our marriage seemed to get. Whenever we argued, she'd often stoop to the lowest level, putting me down for not having a job or a college degree in America. I couldn't believe it. For some reason, she'd say anything to hurt my feelings. It was like she wasn't the same person I had married. Something had changed within her. Her insults cut deep, leaving wounds that would take time to heal. Back when we were struggling, we shared smiles and cherished each moment. But now, with the light at the end of the tunnel in sight, I found myself drowning in resentment and disappointment. Driven to contribute financially and escape the constant verbal attacks, I decided to explore other ways to make money. In secret, I took up work as a food delivery driver. When our neighbor could watch our daughter, I'd fire up the Uber Eats app and zip around on my motorcycle delivering meals to people. I've been doing pretty well delivering food around the city during my free moments. It's been giving me some extra cash for pocket money and small expenses at home. Plus, I can grab some perishable stuff for our baby. Oddly, she never even bothered asking where I got the money. After those initial 4 months of her new job, she stopped checking in if I needed money. It turned into a battle for her to chip in for things like the baby's diapers or food. I mean, where did she think I was supposed to get the cash? When she was in my shoes and I was making way less, I covered everything. Even her school stuff and those expenses that the college loan didn't handle. I paid for whatever our daughter needed. That's why I had to start the food delivery gig. Had to bring in some extra income. I had to sit her down multiple times to remind her about our plan and commitment, but it just turned into shouting matches. Doing a full-time job while attending school wasn't feasible anymore due to scheduling conflicts. Plus, I wanted to wrap up school as soon as possible. That's where the food delivery gig came in handy. Somewhere along the line, we transitioned from a happy couple to bickering over trivial things. As days turned into months, the gap between us widened, and she'd be at work until 8 p.m. She'd spend time with friends and co-workers. I stopped inquiring about her whereabouts because I was sick of the constant fights, and it seemed like she had already given up on me and our daughter. During arguments, she'd even threatened to call the cops on me and kick me out of the apartment since I wasn't paying rent anymore. Through all her insults, I never once laid a hand on her. She'd always undermine my role in caring for our child, claiming she didn't need me around and could afford to put the baby in daycare. Even though I've never been violent with her, she'd still threaten to involve the police. With her continuous threats and the things she was saying, it was clear that her American friends were feeding her lines. At the time, I couldn't make sense of any of it. I was utterly clueless, trying to figure out what was happening to my wife. Then, on one significant evening, much like most days since I started doing food deliveries, it was about 5:30 p.m. I made up my mind to run some food errands before my wife returned home for the day. I got to an apartment to drop off an order. As I knocked on the customer's door, I hoped to turn on my usual charm to maybe get some tips. I stood there on the doorstep holding the food. I pressed the doorbell, and it swung open, sending a shiver down my spine. And there was my wife, standing right there, wrapped in a white towel like she'd just stepped out of the shower. A mix of shock and disbelief surged through me as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. She was as stunned as I was, just standing there without a word. I was all confused, about to ask her why she was there and whose place it was. But then, she panicked and slammed the door shut in my face. I still had the food in my hands, so I chucked it aside. Fueled by a rush of emotions, I kicked the door open to go after her. The door swung inwards and accidentally smacked her in the face, sending her tumbling to the floor. And there it was. The towel she had loosely wrapped around herself unveiled that she was wearing nothing underneath. The impact left a big bruise on her forehead, swelling up like a golf ball in no time. She yelled for the owner of the house, who turned out to be her affair partner. He quickly appeared, looking baffled. He was just wearing shorts and no shirt. My wife jumped up in fear and ran behind him, scared of what I might do next. The guy was trying to shove me out of his apartment, but I was trying to explain that she's my wife, and we've got a baby together. He completely brushed off what I was saying and kept on pushing me, so things escalated into a fight. Picture this. There I am, going at it with this unclothed dude, and my wife, who had hardly anything on, was yelling at the top of her lungs. I must have caused quite a scene because someone decided to call the cops. Next thing I know, I'm in handcuffs, cooling off in the back of a police car. That's when it hit me. My life was pretty much over, and I was looking at being sent packing back to my home country. They had me sitting behind the police car, and meanwhile, they were talking to my wife and her lover, who were both visibly rattled, to get their side of the story. After my wife split, one of the cops came over to me to hear my version. I was in tears, pouring out everything I'd been through. Surprisingly, this cop showed me some empathy. He asked if I had a place to crash or any close friends or family around. I mentioned my sponsor, and he suggested I head there instead of going back home. He laid it out straight. Going back to my wife and daughter in the state I was in would probably end up with me charged for assault and shipped back home. He was brutally honest, telling me he's seen this kind of thing 1,000 times before. And from what my wife told him, she seemed like she was pretty much done with me and looking to press charges. How could she hold such intense hatred for me? Where did I mess up so badly? He advised me to get a lawyer and cut off all contact with my wife. He also shared the address of a shelter in case I needed it. Then he helped me out of the police car, took off the handcuffs, and drove away. As the police car disappeared, I found myself repeatedly touching the marks the handcuffs had left on my wrist. It was a stark reminder of how close I came to losing it all because of my feelings for a woman. That moment hit me deeply, making me realize that the only person who seemed to care whether I lived or died was the police officer who had just driven off. It was a harsh reminder of how alone I felt in this new country. With a heavy heart, I dialed up my friend in Georgia. He lived on his own in an apartment. He suggested I take a bus from New York and come stay with him in Georgia. I reminded him about my daughter, and he became the second person to caution me that in my current situation, if I stayed, my daughter might end up losing both her parents. He hit the nail on the head. In that shocking moment, reality stared me straight in the eyes. My wife was out to wreck my life. Anger and heartbreak duked it out inside me for supremacy. The weight of her betrayal crushed my spirit, leaving me grappling with an overwhelming sense of loss. Despite the police's advice, I had this urge to go back home, grab my stuff, and vanish into thin air. I just couldn't stomach being under the same roof as my wife any longer. The harsh truth of my situation pushed me to confront the boundaries of my choices. When I got back home, my wife had already fetched our daughter from the neighbor's place. She was all geared up for a confrontation, applying an ice pack directly to her forehead. The moment I stepped in, she went on the attack, accusing me of deserting our daughter, even though it was common for us to leave her with the neighbor. I was onto her tactics. She aimed to rile me up. But I wasn't falling into her trap. Looking back, it's clear she didn't have a grasp on her actions. I took the gray rock approach, treating her like an inconspicuous speck on the wall, and this seemed to get under her skin. Upon arriving home, I made a beeline for the bedroom to gather my things. She'd occasionally sneak a peek through the partially open door, attempting to catch a glimpse of my activities. She didn't even fathom the notion that I was about to depart. The idea of me walking away from it all was beyond her imagination. With a heavy heart, teary eyes, and a congested nose, I entered the bedroom and began packing. After stowing away the essentials, I went to bid my daughter farewell while my wife observed. The weight of shame and emotional fatigue prevented me from meeting her gaze, dragging my luggage toward the exit. It hit her then, as I hauled my belongings out, that I was truly leaving. That's when the apologies started flowing. But it was too little. Too late. I didn't turn back. Sadly, that marked the last time I saw my daughter for almost 2 years. I loaded up all my possessions onto my bike and rode south until I found the most budget-friendly hotel to rest my head. I wasn't about to ditch my bike at a discounted rate just to hop on a bus bound for Georgia. So I chose to saddle up and ride my bike all the way from New York to Georgia. The journey was a mix of physical movement and a deep sense of liberation. The stifling air of New York was replaced with the refreshing breeze of freedom when I finally arrived at my friend's place. He had a comfortable setup, and his warm welcome lifted my spirits. He happily offered me his couch as a place to crash for as long as I needed. My phone soon started buzzing with messages from my wife. She left voicemails, questioning my whereabouts, expressing apologies, and urging me to return. To set the record straight, I texted her that I had no intention of ever seeing her again in my life. After 3 months of silence from my end, she turned to my family back home, attempting to use them as intermediaries to persuade me to come back to New York. She spun a tale of me abandoning my daughter. When that strategy fell flat, she gave up on reaching out. Meanwhile, my friend was making moves in real estate, and he roped me in. I got licensed and jumped into wholesaling and flipping houses. 2 months after I left the hustle of New York behind, I sealed the deal on my inaugural property and hit the ground running in the real estate game. A year down the line, I found myself captivated by another realtor, and our connection blossomed. As things progressed, we reached a juncture where the natural next step beckoned. Yet, I made it clear that I had no intention of stepping into the marriage arena again. She understood my history, and our compatibility smoothed the way for mutual understanding. Not to toot my own horn, but real estate had become a goldmine for me. Flipping houses had my bank account ringing, raking in 5 times what an MBA degree might have yielded. Christmas came around, and I whisked my girlfriend away to New York for a getaway. The plan was to spend time with my daughter and officially kickstart the divorce proceedings with my estranged wife. Upon arriving in New York, I took the bold step of reaching out to my estranged wife, breaking over a year of silence. Hearing from me was a shock for her, and her eagerness to meet was palpable. I paid a visit to her, my soon-to-be ex-wife, keeping the surprise of my serious girlfriend under wraps. The highlight, of course, was reuniting with my daughter, the both of them still occupying the same apartment. Regrettably, my soon-to-be ex-wife assumed I was returning to reconcile, but I remained unfazed by her tears as it dawned on her that I had come to end our marriage. I couldn't forget that not too long ago, she aimed to have me in cuffs and sent away after I caught her in her affair. Clarifying my purpose, I explained that my trip to New York was centered on seeing my daughter and finalizing our divorce. Keeping quiet about my girlfriend was a deliberate choice, as I didn't want any complications affecting the custody arrangements for my daughter. At present, I intend to relish my time in New York with my daughter before journeying back to Georgia alongside my girlfriend. My aspiration is that once the divorce is legally settled, my daughter will find her way to Georgia more frequently for visits. Just last week, I found out that my 24-year-old fiancée cheated on me with her boss. The guy is maybe in his mid-40s, I guess. He's married and has 3 kids, by the way. This all went down last November during a work trip when they were out of town. They got together 3 times, if you can believe it. How do I have this info? Well, her boss's wife actually messaged me on Facebook and spilled the beans. She even showed me messages and emails they exchanged, talking in detail about how they cheated on both of us and managed to pull it off. They even laughed about it. But then in the same messages, she'd tell him she loves me and that they need to keep this secret. The boss's wife, who I've met and seemed nice at company events, understandably went ballistic and heartbroken. She's getting ready to serve him with divorce papers tomorrow. She's also planning to send a polite email to their HR department. So here I am, sitting on my phone typing this, while my fiancée is on the other side of the room, sitting on the couch, using her computer to plan a honeymoon for a wedding that's not going to happen. She has zero clue that her world is going to shatter tomorrow. I can't say I've got any sympathy left in me since my own situation fell apart just last week. Whenever I go through those texts and emails, It's like someone's stabbing me in the heart with a knife. 3 years down the drain, although I'm grateful I found out before we tied the knot. Well, at least I have that to be thankful for. She's clueless about my plan, but I've taken a day off tomorrow. Once she heads off to work, I'm going to go around my place, gather all her stuff, pack it up, and leave it by the door. Then I've got to figure out if I can get any of the money I already spent on the wedding refunded. The wedding was supposed to go down in October, but clearly that's not happening. When she walks in after work, I'll kick her out of my apartment and my life. I considered posting those screenshots on her Facebook, but my sister talked me out of it. I also thought about giving her parents a call. I feel bad for them because they're really good folks, and I'll miss her family. They've treated me like one of their own, and I'm not sure how they'll react. But I've made up my mind that she can explain herself to them. I don't want to hear her excuses or lies at this point. All I want is for her to get out of my life so I can figure out what the heck I'm going to do next. Update 1. Holy smokes. I can't wrap my head around the response this has stirred up. The bomb has definitely been detonated. Around 8-ish, my phone went bonkers with her calls, each one followed by a voicemail. I figured out right off the bat what was going down. I dialed up my sister right away to spill the beans to her. She told me to stay strong and offered to come over and keep me company if I wanted. So that's exactly what she's doing. Then I had this seriously tough convo on the phone with my ex's mom. It's crazy, I'm actually dealing with an ex now. It was tough, because this lady hasn't done a darn thing to deserve the hurt I could hear in her voice. Her whole family, from the get-go, treated me like gold. I tried to calmly lay out the situation to her mom and let her know that I just can't find it in me to forgive this mess, and I'll be asking my ex to hit the road. Despite being pretty upset, her mom seemed to get why I feel this way. She even suggested swinging by my place to help my ex gather her stuff. Not a bad idea, I guess. Next, I shot off some texts to a couple of my closest buds to fill them in on what's going on. Man, my phone's been blowing up with messages from them ever since, but I've let them know I'll catch up with them as soon as I can. Right now, though, I'm straight up drowning in all this. I checked out one voicemail from my ex, and it played out just as I figured. Her crying and begging me to call her because we seriously need to talk. I rang her up, no answer, so I started shooting her texts. As soon as I did, she rang me back in a flash. She went into this whole apology routine. "Why did I have to go and call her mom?" she asked. "Why did I bring other people into this mess? I totally lost my cool." I straight up asked her how she thinks I'm feeling, having to go get checked for STDs because my own fiancé went and cheated on me. Can you even imagine how embarrassing that is? At least she didn't try to deny what she did. I told her she needs to swing by this afternoon to pick up her stuff from my place and that we're officially done. She said we'll have a more in-depth talk later, but I shut her down real quick and told her there's not much left to talk about, is there? I also questioned her about how she and this dude could badmouth me and his own wife. Like, they had a laugh about how she gained weight after having 3 kids. It's just heartless, especially since that poor woman didn't deserve any of this. I sure didn't deserve it either. I also brought up the fact that she shouldn't even think about using the excuse of feeling pressured because the guy is her boss. Her texts make it pretty darn clear that she was more than willing to go along with all of this. I reckon she's got a meeting with HR at her job today, and the whole office is buzzing about their little escapade. I can't find an ounce of sympathy for either of them at this point. I'm already emotionally wiped out, and it's not even 10 a.m. where I am. So, once she wraps up her HR chat, I guess she's headed over here to pick up her stuff. I'm hoping it all goes down with minimal drama. My sis should be here, and I'm crossing my fingers that her mom tags along. The landlord says she'll be around too, and she's sorting out changing the locks for me. Hopefully that'll happen either this afternoon or tomorrow. I know this might seem like a rambling post, but I was trying to remember a bunch of things I said, and my mind's racing like crazy right now. Update 2. Well, she's out of here. She did come over with her mom and her best friend, and my sister was also present. No shouting, no arguing. She asked if we could talk alone, but I told her that wouldn't be wise. Has she said everything she needed to say in those text messages with her boyfriend? Predictably, the waterworks started flowing, and her mom assured me they'd make this as swift as possible. So she and her friend went and grabbed some of her stuff, enough for a day or two. While she was away, her mom apologized to me and mentioned that she didn't raise her daughter to behave this way. She inquired if the guy is truly married, and I confirmed, yeah, he's married. Her mom appears to be quite devastated by this whole mess. As they were getting ready to leave, I questioned, "And what about my ring? Doesn't seem like it means much to you?" Her friend seemed like she wanted to say something, but a glance or a signal made her promptly close her mouth. I wouldn't bet a dime in Vegas that her friend wasn't in the know about this all along. She acted like she wasn't going to hand over the ring, and her mom snapped, "Give him the damn ring!" So her friend reluctantly passed the ring to her mom, and her mom handed it to me, once again expressing her apologies. I just let it fall on my coffee table. I don't even want to look at the thing. I suppose she's going to return for the rest, the first batch, tomorrow with her dad. My sister mentioned she'd love to pull the girl's hair out by the roots. Her words, not mine. But right now, I'm so utterly defeated by all of this that all I want to do is lie down and catch some sleep. My wife, a 46-year-old woman, had strong connections with the women in our neighborhood. She had a knack for socializing and was always out and about. Whenever she mentioned having a meeting or some social event to attend, I took her word for it without question. Over a span of 8 years, she orchestrated numerous gatherings, becoming the town's most reliable source of gossip, all while nurturing more than 40 friendships. Among her close companions was a woman named Virginia. Virginia, like my wife, was married and had 2 young children. I suspect that my wife envied the lifestyle Virginia enjoyed. They were well-to-do, and even though we managed to pay our bills, Virginia's family seemed to revel in a bit more luxury. On a fateful day, a different friend of my wife, Samantha, called me up. She expressed concern because she hadn't seen my wife around lately. This was deeply unsettling, for as far back as I could remember, my wife had been going out with her friends at least twice a week. However, she never shared any specifics with me. I inquired with Samantha if my wife had been attending the usual gatherings that she anticipated her to be present at. Samantha confirmed this, but she also added that she wasn't the only one noticing my wife's absence. She might have been the first to call me about it, though. According to her, my wife seemed to have disappeared off the radar for them. She was in the midst of organizing a charity 5K event to raise funds for families in need in our area when she suddenly went silent. Apparently, she had mentioned to one of the girls that she needed some space. But it had been approximately 2 months since anyone had seen her in person, which left them genuinely worried. I hung up with Samantha just moments before my wife walked into the room. She was dressed elegantly, sporting dangling earrings and a form-fitting dress. Her curls bounced with each step, and her heels echoed as she informed me that she was heading out for a grand dinner with friends, celebrating Samantha's birthday. The same Samantha who had just called me, expressing her worry for my wife's safety. I sensed something was terribly amiss. My thoughts raced and my heart thudded in my chest. I couldn't allow her to just walk away. I gently took her hand and planted a kiss on it. I told her I'd drive her to the dinner because I wanted more time to appreciate her. She grew incredibly anxious, trying to persuade me that it wasn't necessary. I, however, insisted repeatedly, perhaps more than I should have, making the situation awkward. As we got into the car, she gave me directions to the dinner. She mentioned that it was being hosted by Virginia, the same close friend I'd heard of before, the one who was also married. That information triggered a memory, a recent Facebook post by Virginia, discussing her upcoming week-long trip. What stood out was my wife's comment, wishing her a safe journey. All this transpired just 3 days ago. My heart raced, my palms grew sweaty, and my grip tightened on the steering wheel. I was clueless about how to navigate the impending situation. My wife's voice cut through, questioning my insistence on driving her when I'd need to rush back home to catch the kickoff. I could see right through her game. She intended to create a scenario where I wouldn't have time to accompany her to the door or delve deeper into her deceit. I bantered with her, suggesting that I didn't need to catch it since one of the players would. She appeared uneasy, hesitating before admitting that she felt bad I couldn't join since it was a women-only dinner. My anger swelled. Her words sounded far too suspicious. I pulled the car to a stop, and my wife's expression turned to horror as I shut off the engine and unbuckled my seatbelt. She leaned in for a kiss and casually mentioned me picking her up at 9. I agreed, but to her surprise, I stepped out of the car and walked beside her. She halted, giving me a puzzled look. I shared that I wanted to be the gentleman and walk her to the door. She insisted I didn't need to, telling me to just go back home. Her rejection was pretty deliberate, yet I just grinned. I strolled up to the front door with her, and her nerves were palpable. When I knocked firmly, she froze in place, her mouth agape. I glanced at her, struggling not to burst into laughter or point out how strangely she was acting. AP swung the door open, clad in a plush robe marked with his initials. At first, he appeared somewhat pleased, but that quickly gave way to evident nervousness. Speaking in a clear voice, I greeted him and stepped inside, explaining that I was escorting my wife to the women's-only dinner, hosted by Virginia. Curiously, I inquired about the absence of all the women, yet neither of them budged. I playfully ribbed my wife for her declaration of arriving late when, in reality, she was early. As they remained rooted there, jaws hanging open, I drew their attention to the dinner table set for two, complete with filled wine glasses, and put on a perplexed expression. AP's face started to turn a shade of purple, yet he remained tight-lipped. In a feeble voice, my wife mentioned that the girls were running late. I responded with a loud, "Is that so?" and inquired about Virginia's whereabouts. A silence hung for a moment before my wife suggested that Virginia might have dashed to the store for something. She attempted to involve AP in her cover-up, but he was visibly annoyed. He straightforwardly said that playing games was futile, and I saw through their deception. He declared they were caught and the charade was over. At this point, my wife's composure wavered, showing signs of distress. AP didn't mince words. He ordered us out of his house, almost pushing us through the front door. Just before he closed it, I dropped a hint that it wouldn't bode well if someone were to tell his wife about the situation. He froze, locked eyes with me, and questioned my intentions. I made it clear that I wanted him to provide me with any evidence of his affair with my wife, so the divorce proceedings would lean in my favor. Seeing his hesitation, I reminded him that 2 marriages didn't need to be ruined, but I warned him that I wouldn't hold back if he didn't assist me. He reluctantly agreed to provide evidence. When my wife heard his admission, she lost her composure, letting out a scream, snatching the keys from my hand and driving off in a hurry. I managed to catch a ride back home and discovered that she had packed some of her belongings and taken her car. Soon enough, I received the proof from AP, a collection of messages and images that left no room for doubt. My lingering questions were all answered. They had undoubtedly been intimately involved numerous times. I had initially intended to hold off on revealing everything to Virginia until after the divorce was finalized, but patience was a virtue I couldn't uphold. It didn't take much longer for Virginia to commence her retaliation against my wife. With knowledge of her mother's location and the ongoing divorce proceedings, it was a safe bet that my wife would be staying there. Rumors spread that Virginia was behind the act of slashing my wife's car tires and etching an unkind word onto the hood. AP and my wife parted ways through divorce, and my ex-wife was ostracized from the circle of women in the community. Now, she's left with no money, no friends, no husband, and absolutely nothing to show for her 46 years of life.